All right, so let's dive into something. Um, Something that I think could be a game changer for solo devs and startups. We're always looking for ways to do more with less.
Right. Especially when you're just starting out, resources are precious.
Exactly. So today we're looking at Tolgee. It's this open source localization platform.
Yeah.
And they're claiming to be a real alternative.
For the big guys, yeah.
Yeah. Crowden, Phrase, localize all those paid services that could really eat into your budget.
I mean, localization is crucial if you're serious about reaching a global audience, right?
Absolutely. But can Tolgee actually replace those pricey options and for free? That's what we're digging into today.
Sounds like a deep dive worth taking.
Definitely. And we'll focus on the stuff that matters most to us, as software engineers.
Mm-hmm.
The functionality, how the API works, whether self-hosting is a headache or not.
Yeah, the practical stuff. What's interesting is that Tolgee is really pushing this developer-friendly angle, which honestly you don't see that often in the localization world.
Right. It can feel like a totally separate world sometimes. So let's see if they live up to the hype. First things first, what exactly is Tolgee?
Okay, so from what I've gathered, they're all about streamlining localization, making it simpler, more efficient, and they've got SDKs for all the popular JavaScript frameworks, React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, Next.js, you name it.
That's a good sign, right, if they're supporting the tools we're already using.
Integration is key, and it suggests they understand the developer workflow.
So what about features? Anything stand out?
One thing that caught my eye is their in-context translating with one-click screenshots.
Okay, wait, break that down for me.
So imagine you're in your app, right? You hit a hotkey, click a piece of text that needs translating, and boom, you're translating it right there in your development environment.
No switching between tools or anything.
Nope. The screenshot feature is super cool. It automatically captures a phrase, highlights it, gives translators context.
So they can see where the text appears in the UI, get a feel for the design, all that.
Exactly. Helps ensure the translations are accurate and fit seamlessly. And get this, it works in production too. With their Chrome extension, anyone can translate your app on the fly, even non-developers.
Whoa, that's pretty slick.
Yeah, very innovative approach.
What about machine translation? Does Tolkee offer that?
Totally. They've got DeepL, Google Translate, AWS Translate, all the big players. Plus, they have a translation memory feature.
Translation memory. What's that?
It basically saves you a ton of time by suggesting translations from your existing project data, so you're not constantly retranslating the same stuff.
That makes sense. Keeps everything consistent, too.
Exactly. And if you need quick translations, they have auto-translation using either the translation memory or your machine translation service of choice.
Okay, so far so good. They seem to have the basics covered. But what about self-hosting? Is that a realistic option with Tolgee?
They offer both cloud and self-hosted options.
Yeah.
And yeah, self-hosting is definitely viable. Complete control over your data, no recurring fees. They've got a couple of different approaches to it, too.
Okay, let's unpack those. What are the options?
So for those who want to get up and running quickly, there's the single container setup. Comes with an embedded PostgreSQL database. It's all bundled together, keeps things simple.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
Right. Minimizes the setup hassle. For more advanced users who need more control, there's a Docker Compose option with an external PostgreSQL database.
Gives you more flexibility, I imagine.
Yeah, you can scale things differently, integrate with existing infrastructure.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Both the cloud and self-hosted options have a free tier.
Yeah. It's a great way to try before you buy, so to speak. You do have limits on strings, MT credits, and seats, but hey, it's free.
Free is always good.
And remember, self-hosting is completely free, even with heavy usage, unless you opt for the paid support tiers.
So far, it's looking pretty promising.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get to the meat of it for developers. The API and developer tools. What's Tolgee offering in that department?
They have a pretty comprehensive set of tools. JavaScript SDKs, a CLI, a REST API, webhooks, it's all there.
So they're not just focusing on the pretty interface.
No, they're thinking about developers. Their documentation goes into detail about each tool and how to use them.
That's good to hear. So let's break it down a bit. What are these tools like?
Well, the JS SDKs, for example, make in-context editing super easy. You just wrap your translatable content with the Tolgee component, and you're ready to translate right within your app.
Okay, so in-context editing is covered. But what about those of us who love to automate things? The CLI seems like it could be powerful.
The CLI is definitely a game changer. Say you've added a bunch of new keys to your code. You don't have to manually copy and paste them into your localization platform anymore.
No more spreadsheets, thank goodness.
Gone. Just run the Tolgee push command and everything is synced with your Tolgee project. And Tolgee grabs the latest translations and integrates them into your code.
No more messing around with files. That's awesome.
Yeah, it streamlines the whole process.
What about those key tags I keep seeing mentioned in the documentation? What are those all about?
Key tags are fantastic for organization. Imagine you're working on a new feature. Tag those keys with something like, I don't know, feature X. Then use the CLI to filter by that tag.
Ah, so it's like a way to categorize and manage your keys.
Exactly. Super helpful for big projects or when you're collaborating with a team. You can even sync tags with your Git branches. Keeps everything nice and organized.
I'm liking what I'm hearing. This is sounding pretty promising, especially for solo devs and startups on a tight budget. Well, let's talk more about the self-hosting. We touched on single container and Docker Compose. What are the real trade-offs in terms of complexity there?
Okay, so the single container approach is kind of like the easy install option. Perfect for solo devs or small teams who prioritize a quick start.
Just get it up and running.
Right. Everything's bundled together. Tolgee handles setting up the database and the platform within that container. They even provide specific commands in the documentation for exposing ports and mounting data volumes.
Sounds pretty painless.
It is. But if you need more flexibility, say you want to scale your database separately or integrate with existing infrastructure, then Docker Compose is the way to go.
Okay, so Docker Compose gives you more fine-grained control.
Yeah. You define separate services for the database and the Tolgee platform, customize configurations, link them to other services in your infrastructure.
Sounds a bit more advanced.
It is, but it gives you a lot of power to tailor things to your specific needs.
So if I wanted to go the Docker Compose route, what kind of commands and configurations am I looking at?
They give a clear example in the Running with Docker documentation. You create a docker-compose.yaml file, define your services. For the Tolgee app, you specify the image, map ports, mount volumes for data persistence. For the database, you choose your PostgreSQL image, set environment variables for credentials, and maybe mount a volume for the database data. You can use environment variables or a separate configuration file to customize Tolgee's behavior.
Wow, that's a lot of control.
It is, but the good thing is there's plenty of documentation to guide you through it.
Still, self-hosting can be a bit intimidating for some people. Anything in the documentation to ease those concerns?
They really emphasize that they want to make self-hosting as easy as possible. They break down the steps, provide sample configuration files, and point out potential pitfalls to avoid. Plus, there's an active community forum.
So you can get help if you run into trouble.
Exactly. You can get help from other users and the Tolgee team.
That's reassuring.
Mhm.
But let's get back to the big question for our listeners, especially those solo devs and startups trying to bootstrap their businesses. Can Tolgee really replace those paid localization platforms for free?
Well, it depends, right? You have to consider your needs and priorities.
Yeah.
If you're a solo developer or a small startup with limited resources, and you're okay with self-hosting, then yeah, Tolgee offers a pretty amazing value proposition.
You get all the features, control over your data, and you can scale without hitting those subscription walls.
Right. But there are some trade-offs to think about, and we should explore those before anyone jumps in head first.
Yeah, I mean, the free tier is great. Don't get me wrong. It's pretty generous. But you might run into those usage limits at some point.
Especially if your project takes off, right?
Exactly. If your user base explodes, you might find yourself needing to upgrade. So you have to balance those potential cost savings of self-hosting against the limitations of the free tier.
And the potential costs of upgrading later.
Right.
What about support? That can be a big concern for solo devs or small teams, right? If something goes wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Support is crucial. And with a self-hosted solution like Tolgee, you're mainly relying on the community.
Which isn't always ideal.
It depends. The Tolgee community seems pretty active, very responsive from what I've seen, but it's not the same as having a dedicated support team you can call up.
So if your project can't afford any downtime,
You might want to think twice. A paid solution with guaranteed support might give you more peace of mind. It's a trade-off, right? Peace of mind and instant support versus cost savings and control.
exactly. It's a classic risk-reward scenario.
What other things should developers be thinking about?
Security, that's a big one,
Yeah, security is always a concern.
especially with self-hosting, because now you're responsible for securing your Tolgee instance.
So it's not just setting it up and walking away.
No, it's an ongoing commitment.
Yeah.
Keeping the software updated, putting security measures in place, monitoring for vulnerabilities. If security is mission critical for your project, you might feel better with a cloud-hosted solution. Let the provider handle all that.
So it's a whole new set of responsibilities that come with self-hosting.
It is. And, the documentation does a decent job. It points out potential issues, gives advice on best practices, but there's always a learning curve.
Right. It takes time to understand the ins and outs of self-hosting, make sure everything's configured properly, secured.
Yeah. It's easy to get excited about a free tool like Tolgee, but you have to be realistic about the extra work involved.
And there's also the argument that paid platforms tend to offer a more polished experience,
Right.
more user-friendly.
I think there's some truth to that. They often invest a lot in making the user experience really smooth and intuitive, and their integrations with other tools and services are usually more mature, which can be a big plus if you're working with a connected workflow.
So it's not just about the core features. It's about how everything fits together.
Exactly. And sometimes that missing piece, that extra 10%, can be a deal breaker.
Especially if it's a feature that's crucial to your workflow or your project needs.
Right. So it's about finding the right balance. What's essential versus what's nice to have.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential downsides of self-hosting Tolgee. But let's not forget why we're even talking about this platform. It's free, open source, and seems to be packed with features, and they're really emphasizing that developer friendliness.
It's definitely a game changer for solo devs and startups with limited budgets.
Right, a real alternative to those expensive subscription-based platforms.
Absolutely. But you need to know what you're getting into. Understand your needs, your priorities, your risk tolerance.
So, if you're willing to put in the time to learn self-hosting, and you're okay with relying on the community for support,
Tolgee could be a fantastic choice.
all right, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Tolgee, what's the big question our listeners should be asking themselves, especially those solo developers and startup founders out there?
I think the question is, what's the real cost? Not just the upfront cost, but the total cost of ownership.
That's a good point. What are some of those hidden costs that people might not think about?
Well, with self-hosting, you've got to consider the time it takes to set things up. Maintaining it, security, troubleshooting. That can add up, especially if you're not familiar with server management.
Right. A lot of developers, especially new ones, might not realize that until they're in the thick of it.
Exactly. And then with the paid options, there are those recurring subscription fees. You've got potential usage limits that can sneak up on you, and you might end up locked into a specific vendor's ecosystem.
So it's about taking a broader view.
A holistic view, weighing all those factors. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. It really depends on your individual situation, your comfort level with different technologies, and your long-term goals.
That's why it's so important to experiment.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of open source. You can try Tolgee without risking any money. Set up a self-hosted instance. Mess around with the API, get a feel for it. You might be surprised at what you can do with a free, community-driven tool like this.
And if you decide later that a paid option is better for you, you haven't lost anything.
Except a bit of time.
The key is to find the solution that lets you build great software, software that reaches a global audience, and do it without breaking the bank.
Or losing your mind in the process. Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Tolgee, it really seems like they're offering something special here.
It's exciting, right?
It is. Feature-rich, designed for developers, and free for self-hosting.
You can't beat that.
But like with any big decision, do your research. Weigh the pros and cons. Figure out what your needs are, your priorities.
And don't be afraid to experiment.
Exactly. The world of localization is massive. And it's always changing. But there's a perfect solution out there for everyone.
Waiting to be discovered.
So happy coding, everybody, and good luck with your localization journey.